Hi everyone, welcome to week 6 of distance learning. So this week we're going to be covering solving quadratics by factoring. This is most definitely a review, but it is one of those math skills that you're going to have pretty much in any math class that you take, and it starts in Algebra 1 and then you hit it again class after class. This is a really important skill, which is why we've been reviewing it so much. So the first section here where we have our learning target, these are just the steps that you're going to need to take in order to solve by factoring. So we want to put it in standard form. That's this first bullet point here. Standard form just means that everything is on one side equal to 0. So you'll see in this equation here how we've got everything on one side equal to 0 on the other side. That means that equation is in standard form. Next step is to identify the factors of A times C that equal B. So depending on who your teacher is, some of you might do it in a table form like you see here. Some of you might do like the X, some of you might do the I. I do the I, so I'm going to show you that way, but it's just a way of organizing your thoughts. So for this example here, A times C, A is the number that's in front of x squared. So when there's no number there, it's implied to be a 1. So that's why it says the A value is 1. Your B value is whatever number is in front of x. That number is 6. And then your C value is the last number, or the constant. It's called constant because it's a number that does not change. It's not attached to a letter at all. It's all by itself. So our C value is 8. When you're listing A, B, and C, you do not want to carry that X with you. So A, B, and C are always going to be numbers. You're never going to see a letter that's there. So at the top of my I, I'm going to put A times C, and at the bottom, I'm going to put B. If you're doing the X, you would put A times C up here and B on the bottom. And then if you're doing the table like you see here, this is A, this is C, and so on, okay? So my value A times C is 1 times 8, which is just 8, and then my B value is 6. So what you're looking for here is two numbers that are going to multiply to give you 8 and add or subtract to give you 6. So off the top of your head, just start thinking of factors of 8. The first factor I always like to list is that number in itself. So 8 and 1. And then think, is there any way that I can either do 8 plus 1 or 8 minus 1, 1 minus 8, 1 plus 8 to get to 6? The answer to that is no. So I'm going to look for another group of factors. Other factors of 8 are 4 and 2. If I add 4 and 2, I get 6. So that means the 4 and the 2 are going to be my factor pair here. And then you'll see on the table that's over here with the blue circle around it, 4 times 2 is the same thing as 2 times 4. So 4 and 2 are your factor pairs. The way that it is written for you in step 2, this is called double distribution. And it is just one way of factoring. Some other ways that we've learned are box method. I know a lot of you like to use box method. You've learned slide and divide, and then this one is double distribution. So it's kind of up to you whatever method you want to use. This method is using double distribution. Double distribution takes this middle term, the original middle term, and it's going to break it into the the factor pair that you found, which was the 2x and the 4x. If I were to combine 2x and 4x together, I would get back to 6x. So I really haven't changed the problem at all. I've just made it look different. On this next step, you take out the greatest common factor between those two terms. The greatest common factor means that you can evenly divide that term out of both of them. So if I'm looking at x squared and I'm looking at 2x, what can I take from both of them? Well, I can take an x from both of them. And that x that I divide by is going to get moved to the front of my parentheses. So that x that you see here is the one that was taken out. If I do x squared divided by x, think of that like you've got two x's and then you take one away. All you're left with is a single x. If I do 2x divided by x, those x's are going to cancel and you're just going to be left with 2. On the 4x plus 8, I can't take an x from both of them because the 8 doesn't have an x for me to take. The only thing that I can take from 4 and 8 is 4. So if I divide both of these terms by 4, the 4 that I'm dividing by is going to go out in the front. If I do 4x divided by 4, these 4's cancel and I'm just left with x. And then 8 divided by 4 gives me 2. So all I've done is taken out an x from the first set and a 4 from the second set. And then in parentheses, I have whatever is left over from doing that division. So you'll notice that on the step that's underlined in blue there, the terms that are in parentheses are the same. They are both x plus 2. If you do this method correctly, they're always going to match. So if you have one of them that's x plus 2, and let's say the other one was like x minus 1, that would not be correct. You know, at that point, you've taken something out incorrectly. So go back and check what you did. So once you have those parentheses being the same, you can move on to step 4, which is grouping the GCFs together. Remember, GCF means greatest common factor. It is just these, whoops, I meant for that to be a highlighter. It is just for these that you've taken out in the front. That's all it is, okay? So the x and the plus 4, those are your GCFs. I'm going to put those together. And then the matching term that I have in parentheses, that's going to go next to it. So your factored form here would be this x plus 4 times x plus 2. And again, that is the double distribution method. If you don't like it, you can use whatever method you want to. Okay, so I'm going to do this one with double distribution just to kind of show you, and then I'll do some of the other ones with different methods. Step 1 for these is always make sure that you have your polynomial in standard form. Right now, this is not in standard form because of the number 2 that's here. Standard form means that this number needs to be 0. So what I'm going to do to make that 0 is I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. So you've got x squared minus x minus 2. I can't combine that minus 2 with anything because it doesn't have an x or an x squared attached to it, so I'm just going to leave it in the back. And then I have equals 0. Now that I have equals 0, I can start factoring. So my first step, I'm going to draw my I or my X or T-chart or whatever you like. A times C goes on the top and B goes on the bottom. Remember, my A value is the number in front of x squared. There's not one written there, so it's implied to be 1. My B value is the number that's in front of x. It's not written, so it's implied to be 1, but I have this negative sign right here. So I need to make B a negative 1. And then my C value is the minus 2. So be careful when you're doing this and make sure if your number has a negative sign in front of it, you're taking that with you. So on the top of my I, I've got A times C. A is 1 and C is negative 2. So this is going to multiply to give me negative 2. And then B at the bottom is negative 1. So I need two numbers that multiply to negative 2 and add or subtract to give me negative 1. The only two factors of 2 are 2 and 1. So that has to be my factor pair. I just need to figure out where the negative sign goes. If I did 2 minus 1, that would give me positive 1. But the number that I want at the bottom is a negative 1. So that negative sign is going to go on the 2. So negative 2 plus 1 gives me negative 1. Negative 2 times 1 gives me negative 2. So I know that the negative 2 and the 1 are going to be my factor pair. So now I'm going to set up my double distribution. So our original standard form looked like this. What I'm going to do is change this x that's here, and I'm going to make this change into my two factor pair. So I'm going to have negative 2x, that negative 2 comes from right here, and then plus 1x, and that 1x comes from right here. Then I've got minus 2 equals 0. So all I've done is split the middle term into that factor pair that I found. Okay, now I'm going to group these together. So you want to create two groups of 2, and you're going to take out the greatest common factor on each side. So looking at x squared and negative 2x, I can take an x from both of them, and then I'm going to do the division. So I've got x squared divided by x. Think of it like you've got two x's and you're going to take one away. You're left with just a single x, so I'm going to put that here. Then I've got negative 2x divided by x. Well, these are going to cancel, and you're going to be left with negative 2. So I'm going to put a minus 2 right here. Now let's move on to the second group. So between a positive 1x and a minus 2, I can't take an x because the minus 2 doesn't have an x for me to take. They don't even really share any factors other than 1, so the only thing I can take out is 1. So I'm going to put plus 1. If I divide 1x by 1, it's just x, and if I divide negative 2 by 1, it's just negative 2. Any number divided by 1 is itself. So this is going to become x minus 2. Okay, double check that you did it correctly. Your parentheses should be matching, and they are. They're both x minus 2. So the way I'm going to write this is I'm going to group my GCFs together, or those two terms that you took out. So I'm going to have x plus 1. That will be one of my factors. And then my second factor is going to be that matching set of parentheses, which is the x minus 2. And this would be my factored form. A little shortcut, this only works when your a value is 1. So in this problem, there was nothing in front of the x squared. If your a value is 1, notice that the two numbers that I found right here, the negative 2 and the positive 1, are the same as the two numbers that end up in my factors. That is the shortcut whenever your a value is 1. So if you don't want to go through all of the double distribution, you can just take the two numbers that you found in the I and put those in as your factors. But that only works when a is equal to 1. If a is a number other than 1, meaning that you have something in front of x squared, that trick does not work. Now that we've got our factored form, I want to ultimately solve this for x. So what I'm going to do is this whole thing is equal to 0. So I'm going to use the zero product property. That means that I can take both of my factors and I can independently set each of them equal to 0. And then I can solve that for x. So if I subtract 1 here, my answer is x equals negative 1. And if I add 2 here, my answer is x equals 2. So my two answers are what I've just circled in red. This that's here, that is just the factored form. That is not really your final answer. These two numbers that say x equals, that part is your final answer. Okay, on this next example, I'm going to do box method this time because that was something that y'all really enjoyed doing in class. You'd like that method the best. This is not in standard form. I have to turn it into standard form. You always want to keep the x squared term positive. So we are not going to subtract 2x squared from both sides because it's already positive. If I subtracted it, it would make it negative, and I don't want that. So instead, I'm going to add x to both sides. I can't combine x squared and x because they don't have the same exponent. Then I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. And that can't be combined with anything, so I'm just going to leave it in the back. And now we're in standard form. So my a value here is 2. It's this number in the front. My b value is 1 because there's 1 in front of that x, but we just didn't write it. And then my c value is negative 3 because that's the number that has no letter attached to it. Now, if you are going to do box method, the setup is always the same. Draw your box, draw an I. Remember at the top of the I, we're putting A times C, and at the bottom, we're putting B. So the A times C on the top would be 2 times -3, which is -6, and the B on the bottom would be 1. So I need a pair of numbers that multiplies to give me -6 and adds or subtracts to give me 1. I can do 3 and 2 and a -2. 3 times -2 would give me -6. 3 minus 2 would give me 1. So I'm going to take the 2x squared that's here, and I'm going to put it in this upper left-hand corner. I'm going to take the -3 that's in the back, and I'm going to put it in the lower right-hand corner. And then the 2 factors that I found, I'm going to put them on the diagonals with an x attached to it. So I'm going to have 3x and -2x. If you wanted to swap those and make it -2x in one diagonal and 3x in the other, that would also work. You would end up getting the same answer. So what I'm going to do here is go along the rows and the columns and take out the greatest common factor. I cannot use the trick of just taking the 3 and the -2 and making those my factors, because that would not work because my A value is equal to 2. So I have to do a box method or slide and divide or double distribution, okay? So between the 2x squared and the -2x, so this arrow that's going up here, I can take a 2 from both of those, and I can take an x from both of those. On the next column, we've got 3x and -3. I can take a 3 from both of those. Between 2x squared and 3x, I can take an x. And between -2x and -3, I can take a negative because they're both a negative. And then I'm just going to take 1 because I can't divide a 2 or a 3 out of both of those. So using box method, your factored form is going to come from the top of the box and the side of the box. So we're going to have 2x plus 3 times x minus 1, and that's my factored form using box method. Now when you're solving this, remember that this whole thing is equal to 0. So you've got 2x plus 3 and x minus 1 is all equal to 0. What we can do now is use what's called the zero product property. That means that I can take each of my factors and I can set them equal to 0. So I've got 2x plus 3 equals 0, and I've got x minus 1 equals 0. I'm going to solve these two equations independently, and it's going to end up giving me 2 solutions. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides here, and then I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides, and I've got x equals -3/2. On the other one, I just need to add 1 to both sides, and I get x is equal to +1. Okay, so my 2 solutions here are the 2 things that I've just circled in red. What I've boxed here, this is just the factored form. That's not the answer. Once you get the factored form, you need to set that equal to 0, and you need to solve it for x. So in this case, we got 2 solutions. I'm going to skip down to the very last question, and then I'm going to leave this one here for you as practice. So you can do that one on your own, and you can look at the notes key that's been uploaded to Google Classroom to check your work. But I'm going to focus on this last one here. This one I'm going to do with slide and divide. I think we did that in class. That was like one of the things you learned before we went on spring break. But first, before I do that, I need to get this in standard form. Notice that I have a -5x squared. We want to keep our x squared positive. Right now it's negative. So in order to make it positive, I'm going to add 5x squared to both sides. So I'm going to have 5x squared plus 3x minus 2 is equal to 0. Now that it's in standard form, I can start factoring. And the method that I'm going to show you here is slide and divide. So as always, I'm going to start off with the I. I'm going to put A times C at the top and B on the bottom. A is equal to 5. That's the number in front of x squared. b is equal to 3, that's the number in front of x, and c is equal to -2, that's the number all by itself. So what's going to go on top is 5 times -2, which is -10, and what goes on the bottom is 3. So I need two numbers that multiply to -10 and add or subtract to give me 3. Factors of 10 are 5 and 2. And if I do 5 minus 2, that gets me a positive 3. So 5 times -2 is -10. 5 times -2 is positive 3. So the way that slide and divide works is you're going to take whatever your factor pair is. I'm going to have x plus 5, and I'm going to have x minus 2, and that 5 and 2, -2 are coming from the I just drew. I'm going to divide both of these numbers by a, whatever your a term is. So in this case, we said that a was equal to 5. So I'm going to divide both of these terms by 5. If you do this division and you get a whole number, for example, if I do 5 divided by 5, that gets me 1. I'm just going to put x plus 1. If I do this division and it gives me a fraction, like on the second factor you have 2 divided by 5, that's a fraction. I can't reduce that to a whole number. You're going to move the bottom of your fraction in front of the x. So this is going to become 5x minus 2. And now I've got my factored form. Remember that all of this is equal to 0. So I can go ahead and solve this now. I can set both of these factors equal to 0. And then I can solve for x. So on the first one, all I need to do is subtract 1, and I get x is equal to -1. On the second one, this is a 2-step, I'm going to add 2 to both sides, and then I'm going to divide both sides by 5, and you're going to get x is equal to 2 over 5. And those are your two solutions. So I want you to try the one that I left blank and labeled as practice. I want you to try that one on your own. Use whatever method you want to. If you want to use box method, if you want to use slide and divide, if you want to use double distribution, you take your pick of whichever one you liked best. Just to kind of recap with you, on page 1, I did double distribution. The top example on this page, so this one right here, this one was the box method. And then the bottom example, this one here, this one was slide and divide. Okay, so pick whichever one you liked and use that for your practice problem. You can check the answer to that on Google Classroom. Please let your teacher know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching. Y'all have a great week.